All right, guys. So this past Saturday night, Sean Strickland put on a masterful performance on his way to winning the UFC middleweight title. 49-46 were the scores across the board and a nasty knockdown in round one. You've all had about 36 hours to let it sink in. Put it into words, this performance by the American out in Sydney, Australia. What impressed you the most about Strickland's tactics? All right, we go to the first take this week from Nolan.
What stuck out to me the most, well, first of all, just an absolutely incredible performance. I think really just one of those moments that makes our sport, so if you want to call it a sport, our activity so much different than everything else, right? I mean, the last thing that you expect to happen happens. And sure, it's not every time that we get some sort of rarity like that. But for me, the fact that he was able to put that sort of performance on for 25 minutes is incredible, right? We've seen some pretty amazing title fight upsets, throughout history, but it's always kind of a finish or, maybe a slip up from the favorite or something goes wrong for the favorite. But for him to go in there and really drive home who the better fighter was on that night, to walk down Israel Adesanya for 25 minutes, to not show any fear, but to also fight smart and also do exactly what he said he wasn't going to do, which was to not use his wrestling, which he didn't use at all. So for me, it was an absolutely incredible performance, regardless of if you like Strickland, if you don't like him, if you don't have an opinion about him as a person. I think you really have to give him a lot of credit. You got to give Eric Nixick a lot of credit, the guys at Extreme Couture, for just really putting together one of the most well-rounded, surprising performances, upsets of all time in a title fight. So I was absolutely blown away. The people in Australia were even blown away from their reaction at the end there, giving him a massive ovation on the final bell, a massive ovation when they announced and knew. It felt like Sean Strickland was fighting at home in Australia there. So just a really special night for him, a really intriguing night for us on the outside. And this division is certainly in a very strange place now going forward.
All right, Mr. Segura, transport yourself back 36 hours, man. What were you thinking as this thing was unfolding the way it did? All 25 minutes, or maybe 24 minutes and 50 seconds, was basically on the feet, and most of it out in open space.
Yeah, insane. I'm still in disbelief. I'm still in shock. I'm kind of waiting to see when this kind of becomes a prank, or maybe when I wake up. It kind of seems unreal. I kind of had the same reaction that Sean Strickland had after his fight, where he's like, is this real? Can somebody punch me right now? Like, is this really happening? I don't think anybody saw this coming. There's maybe some people on Twitter that will swear that they did, but and how dare you discount Strickland? But honestly, if you're somebody that knows about mixed martial arts and on your full senses, you had all the right reasons to pick Adesanya to win this fight, win it quite comfortably, and even go a step beyond and say that he was going to finish Strickland with ease. I mean, I was pretty dismissive of his chances on the MMA Junkie previous show with Farah, and not that anything against Strickland, it just seemed like such a tough matchup for him. Out of all the fighters that you could put in there, Strickland just seemed to have the worst path to victory out of all of them. And the funny thing is that leading up to the event, we're all asking, is he going to wrestle? Is he just going to empty out his entire gas tank and try to knock him out in the first round? Like, basically, what is he going to do that's not Strickland-like? Because Strickland-like things are not going to work on Adesanya. What are some of the things that he's going to do to beat him? And he was exactly Sean Strickland in that cage. He did not change at all. He didn't shoot for a single takedown. He didn't attempt a submission. He didn't do anything. He was Sean Strickland. He stayed at that weird range, marched him down, stayed square. That, iCarly stands that people make fun of him for. And he beat one of the greatest middleweight champions that the UFC has ever had. It was an incredible performance that till this day, I'm still in awe and shock. So congrats to Sean Strickland and the guys at Extreme Couture, because they pulled it off. They did it.
And I'm dying to chime in here, man. I know it's Goza's turn, but I just want to add a few things. Let's not forget, Adesanya is a former world kickboxing champion. He didn't attempt a takedown. He didn't, the fight never found itself on the ground other than the knockdown. So of the two, Strickland knocked him down. We kept saying the one-hitter quitter belonged to Adesanya. Strickland's the one that landed it. The only thing I will say, Danny, is Yeah, he kind of was Strickland-like, but in a way he wasn't because he's more of the volume guy, and he kind of held back. It's almost like he let Izzy kind of run out of gasoline because towards the end he was not only he was damaged and exhausted. All right, but this is about you guys. You guys are the stars. Goes your thoughts, man.
Man, I think it was a pretty tremendous performance for many reasons, but honestly, I thought Nolan hit it. It's like it felt more like it was a team effort on Sean Strickland's side because how long have we been sitting here saying this guy's uncoachable, right? We've heard that from many people. And I
Low
think what we
fighter
finally
IQ.
yeah, what we finally saw on Saturday was Sean Strickland and his coaching staff finding some sort of middle ground, right? Sean won that fight by being patient, by not giving Israel Adesanya anything to work with, right? He hit the gas when he needed to. When he saw the opportunity, he struck. But when he didn't have it, he was patient. He was very defensive. If you look at his face, he didn't really have much damage. Now, after round 2, it got a little scary because you weren't really seeing that volume that you normally get from Sean. You weren't getting too many things. And I think that's where you give Eric Nixick his props. I think he kind of woke him up. He got in his face. And I think it was the reminder. We've all heard Sean Strickland talk so many times about that Jared Cannonier fight and the decision and how he felt he won. And later on, he kind of admitted that he understood it a little bit more. I think I think Eric Nixick getting in his head and screaming at him kind of woke him up and told him, you can't do that coming out in round 3. And Sean started to put his foot on the gas a little bit more. And I think you have to kind of give the whole team props in trying to find that middle ground, which is what maybe pulls out the best version of Sean Strickland in this fight. But man, I mean, nobody was really expecting this type of fight. Like you said, George, them going toe-to-toe for 5 rounds had Israel Adesanya written all over it, but that didn't work out that way, right? So you have to give props to Sean Strickland, and you have to give props to his team because I think they came together, and that's what got him that victory.
Yeah, I thought round 3 was close because Izzy, I thought, was replicating what he did in round 2, but Strickland did have some damaging shots in there. He didn't have the significant strike advantage, but he was a little more damaging, although not much. But it really could have been 2-1 Adesanya going into round 4, even though Adesanya had suffered the knockdown and was probably the more damaged of the two. But the judges' scorecards told us otherwise. We have no doubt who won rounds 4 and 5. But, I mean, this was just simply amazing. I would have never in 1,000 years thought it would go down this way, And I don't think there's anyone, Danny, I don't think there's anyone on Twitter that predicted it would go down like this. Anybody that said Strickland, including Goz and I chatted with Johnny Eblin, who is the Bellator middleweight champion. He's trained with Strickland, but he kept it real, man. It has to involve wrestling, and he did give credit to Strickland. He says when Strickland gets on top of you, his grappling's underrated. He's heavy, but none of that happened. I haven't found one person. I don't mind if you took Strickland. I would have called you crazy pre-fight, but I haven't found anyone that says he can out kickbox him for 25 minutes, and of the two, he'll get the knockdown. Which obviously that's you're not going to predict the whole thing, right, minute by minute, but still, this was just simply amazing. And the communication between the coach, you heard Eugene Berriman say that Izzy was flat, or he just had, in some universe, I guess, a poor performance, and the coaches and the athlete didn't seem to be on the same page, and the opposite was happening on the other corner. All right, guys, let me follow up here with a couple things. Did Izzy have a bad night, or was just Strickland on? A little bit of both? No?
Yeah, it's one of those debates you'll always have, and I think part of it is tied into the fact that we're used to seeing Israel look so good, and even when he doesn't look necessarily the most exciting, he looks pretty dominant. So I think it's tough to kind of weed or just kind of filter that out of your brain, right? Knowing what he's capable of. But at the same time, I think the fact that we saw it for so long, we have to credit Sean Strickland. We haven't heard much from Israel Adesanya after the fight. He kind of was a bit cryptic, so quick with his media in the back, didn't really want to answer questions, posted a quick thing on social media, had Eugene answer some questions to the media, and that was it. So we don't really know exactly what his take on the whole thing was. Did he just have an off night? Was he hurt? What was it? But for me, I think a lot of the energy just with what we saw and the way it was done and the longevity that it was done, you have to give Sean Strickland that amount of credit. I feel like I see it from a lot of people, but there's a lot of people that are kind of saying like, oh, I mean, we heard Dana White say it, right? Israel looked slow. He looked stiff. Maybe that's been the case in other fights where the champion loses, that you're like, man, they really put up a stinker there. Amanda Nunes gassed against Juliana Pena. She just didn't look right. But I think that this has to be more of a 50-50 split. I think Sean Strickland and his coaching staff deserves a tremendous amount of credit. I can't just tack it up to Israel not having a good night.
And I alluded to what Berriman had said about Izzy in the alternate universe. In that same post-fight interview, he said, fight week went well. Training camp went well. We had the right partners in there. He really didn't offer any excuses. The only thing he said was, if we fight him tomorrow or in a week, we feel like we can make the adjustments to win. But on that particular night, he was poor. He didn't say anything about an injury or anything like that. Danny, let me ask you this. Aside from the knockdown in round 1, what do you think was a turning point in this tactical stance, striking affair, we'll call it? What did you think might have made a difference for Strickland along the way? An adjustment or a tactic or a technique?
I think what gave Adesanya the biggest problem was the range, because Strickland operates at a very weird range. He doesn't really stay at a distance, but he also doesn't do clinch work and dirty boxing. It's like this weird in between that a lot of people are not used to fight at. And, he keeps that same pace the entire time. He's constantly on your face. And he just kind of keeps that range constant. And I think that's what gave Israel Adesanya issues, because at distance, he did have some success with leg kicks. But once, Strickland close the distance, those leg kicks weren't really there. And the looping punches, Strickland has this weird shell where like he kind of keeps his hands up in like a weird space and is able to see everything coming. And I just think that Adesanya wasn't able to figure it out. He got instruction from his corner in order to get past that, but the instructions just ended right there, right when the bell rang, and he would just default to his normal self. So that's what I think is the biggest thing, the range. I think the person who managed the range best in that fight was Sean Strickland, and that gave him the victory. But yeah, a fantastic performance by Sean Strickland. Great stuff by the guys at Extreme Couture and Eric Nixick. Like, really, few saw this coming. I mean, it was just a crazy, crazy fight. In fact, when the knockdown happened in the first round and the bell rang and Israel Adesanya got to see the second, I went, okay, this was it. Like, Strickland kind of blew it. This was his chance to put him away. And then Adesanya does win the second round, at least in my eyes. So I kind of go, okay, things are returning to normal per se. But no, clearly it was Sean Strickland's night, and he looked great.
Goes one for you. Did Izzy break in that fight, in your opinion?
That's that's a really strong word. It is very possible, because if you look at what happened towards the end of round 1, it might have taken him to a place that, caused a lot of embarrassment for him. And that was when he got knocked out by Pereira. Maybe it brought him back there, and maybe he just never recovered from that. It was a very, very puzzling performance from him, because he's not a guy that you ever really look at as an unmotivated fighter. But in those last few rounds, he really just looked like he just didn't want to be there. And I think Sean Strickland was just as puzzled, and he took advantage of it. It makes things interesting, man. Like, I think that's something that we really need to figure out on Izzy's side.
1 foot out the door in the chat. And I recommend, if you want a question or comment, put it in the chat. Leave it a couple times. If I don't see it, don't spam us, obviously. But the better the question, more likely it is to be included in the show. Which one of you wants to take this one? He says Izzy was outclassed by the basics. That's actually an interesting take in a way, because Sean wasn't too fancy. He didn't unleash an arsenal, right? We've already talked about no wrestling, no jiu-jitsu, no Greco against the cage or anything. Is that true in your guys' eyes? Anybody want to chime in on that one?
Yeah, I think it's very true. There's just, when he says the basics, I mean, there was no bait, right? Like, he would throw bait out there, but Sean wouldn't take it, and he didn't know how to adjust to that. And I think it really, really frustrated him. And that is something that, that's why, like, I think somebody even mentioned it in the chat earlier. Sean Strickland was supposed to wrestle, but they have plan A's and plan B's. And I felt like Strickland had a plan A and a plan B, but Israel Adesanya just didn't have that plan B. And so when Sean Strickland wasn't taking that bait, he just looked really puzzled out there. And that's something that I don't think should happen at this high level.
Ryan Park says, Go ahead, Dan.
George, if you don't mind me inserting a couple things here. There's two takeaways that regarding Adesanya that I kind of leave with from UFC 293. One, how seriously did he take this fight? We know that he had that like movie premiere the week of. I mean, that's a big thing to deal with. He was talking about Dricus. Yes, he gave Strickland his respects in interview, but another thing is in training and in action. And I did write on the Slack channel right before the fight started when Adesanya stepped in the cage that I thought he looked a little soft. I thought he looked not as ripped as he normally looks. I don't know if maybe I'm looking too much into it, but and then we get Eugene Behrman's comments, but we know that they're always going to be classy and give Sean his respects. I wonder how seriously Adesanya took this fight, keeping in mind that on paper it probably looked like one of the easiest matchups he had gotten in his entire UFC career. So I don't know if you guys kind of share that sentiment.
We did mention that because if you watch Embedded, there was a ceremony at the park. I'm not disrespecting that at all, but it seemed like every day there was those duties of media, the what they have open workouts. They had the press fight conference with the dais, and then you're signing gloves and posters, and then I'll throw in the movie premiere. And I will give Izzy this. I saw him at the expo. He is all in when he meets people. He's one of the best. If you ever get a chance to meet him, shakes your hand, asks you your name, looks you in the eye. However you want to do it, man. You want to pose? Let's do it. He'll even follow up with a question. Where are you from? He'll put his arm around you. You want to do a selfie this way or that? I mean, I'm telling you, he's all in, and he was doing that at the premiere. But again, look, some people will tell you they don't leave the hotel at all. It's just intense. I don't like interviews, nothing. And then others actually relax that way. But I was thinking the same thing, Danny. Ryan Park in the chat says everyone's performance is a team effort. Geez, give Strickland his due. You guys are coping harder than Dana. I don't think we've been disrespectful about Strickland. I think a lot of what we've been talking about and our doubts probably were pre-fight, but I think a lot of people shared it. It really had to be a perfect performance from Strickland, who again has, and his own words, he's deterred from game plans. He hasn't listened to coaches. You know what I mean? He's made mistakes in there. He got viciously knocked out by the guy that Israel just beat. Luckily, I think that training session, the week he was out there with him, paid off for him as well. But I don't think I disagree with Ryan Park in the chat, but keep them coming.